Captain Daniel Carter stood on the bridge of his ship and looked out at the massive space station ahead of them. The station was huge and covered in lights that sparkled like diamonds against the black void of space. It belonged to the Galactic Council and represented everything that humanity was not. It was new and powerful and intimidating beyond measure. Daniel's ship was called the Defiant, and it was none of those things. The hull was old and patched in so many places that it looked like a quilt his grandmother might have sewn. The engines made a grinding noise that worried everyone who heard it. The metal walls groaned and creaked like an old house settling in the wind. Earth had sent their best ship to meet with the Council, but their best was 200 years old and held together with determination and spare parts. The crew knew what everyone thought of them. They had seen the looks from other species when they docked at trade stations. They had heard the whispers and sometimes the outright laughter. Humans were new to space travel, and their technology showed it. While other species flew ships that could fold space and bend reality, the humans still used fusion reactors and chemical fuel. It was embarrassing, but it was all they had. Lieutenant Greg Monroe walked up to Daniel with a datapad in his hands. He was young and nervous and trying hard not to show it. "The Council wants us to dock in Bay 73, sir." Daniel nodded slowly. Bay 73 was at the bottom of the station where cargo ships and mining vessels went. It was an insult, and everyone on the bridge knew it. The Council was making a point before they even started talking. "Take us in, Monroe." Daniel's voice was calm and steady. "Let them think what they want. It does not matter what they think right now. What matters is what happens next." First Officer Karen Phillips stood beside Daniel with her arms crossed. She was tough and smart, and did not suffer fools gladly. "They think we are a joke, sir." Her voice was tight with anger. "Every species out there is looking at us like we are children playing dress-up?" Daniel turned to look at her. "Let them look. Let them laugh. It will make what comes next much more satisfying." Karen did not smile, but her eyes showed that she understood. They had a plan, and the plan required the aliens to underestimate them completely. The Defiant moved slowly toward the docking bay, and Daniel could see alien ships all around them. They were beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Sleek and fast and powerful. Their hulls shimmered with energy shields, and their weapons glowed with barely contained power. Compared to them, the Defiant looked like a garbage scow that had wandered into a palace by mistake. Through the observation windows of the station, Daniel could see crowds gathering to watch them dock. Aliens of every shape and size pressed against the glass and pointed at the human ship. Some of them were definitely laughing. Daniel saw a crystalline creature that sparkled in the light turn to its companion and make a gesture that needed no translation. It was mocking them. Chief Mechanic Lisa Graham's voice came over the internal communication system. "Captain, we have a small problem with the port side thruster. Nothing serious, but it is making that noise again." Daniel sighed. "Can you fix it, Lisa?" "Already on it, sir, but it is going to sound pretty rough for the next few minutes. Just warning you so you do not think we are falling apart." "We are not falling apart. We are just very old and very tired." The bridge crew chuckled at that, and some of the tension eased. Lisa had a way of making even the worst situations seem manageable. She had been keeping the Defiant running for 10 years and knew every bolt and wire on the ship. If Lisa said they would make it, then they would make it. The docking procedure took longer than it should have because the station's automated systems kept trying to reject their ship. The computer did not recognize half of their equipment codes because human technology was so different from the standard galactic systems. Finally, a living controller had to manually guide them in, and Daniel could hear the annoyance in the alien's voice as it gave them instructions. When they finally settled into the docking clamps, Daniel stood up and straightened his uniform. It was clean and pressed, but it had been repaired many times. You could see the patches if you looked closely. The whole crew was like that. Proud and professional, but showing the wear of a species that was struggling to keep up with the rest of the galaxy. Karen assembled the landing party. Besides Daniel and herself, there were 2 security officers named Paul Jenkins and Marie Santos. They were good people and solid in a fight, but Daniel hoped it would not come to that. They were here to talk, not to shoot. At least not yet. Ambassador Helen Price was waiting for them at the airlock. She was a diplomat and had spent her whole career trying to get the Council to take humanity seriously. It had not gone well. The Council treated Earth like a backwards planet full of primitives who had barely discovered fire. Helen was tired, and Daniel could see it in her eyes. She had fought this fight for so long and gotten nowhere. "Are we ready, Ambassador?" Daniel kept his voice gentle. Helen nodded. "As ready as we will ever be, Captain. They are going to try to push us around in there. They have already decided we are guilty and this whole trial is just for show." Daniel smiled. "Then let us give them a show they will never forget." They walked through the airlock and into the station proper. The corridors were enormous and made of some material that seemed to glow from within. Everything was clean and perfect and made the humans feel small and dirty by comparison. Station personnel moved past them without a second glance. To them, the humans were beneath notice. The walk to the council chamber took 20 minutes, and with every step, Daniel felt the weight of what they were about to do. They were going to challenge the most powerful organization in the known galaxy. They were going to stand in front of species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years and tell them no. It was insane and dangerous and absolutely necessary. The council chamber doors opened before them, and Daniel took a deep breath. This was it. There was no turning back now. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine the future of humanity in the galaxy. They would either win a place at the table or be crushed under the heel of powers they could not hope to match. Helen walked in first with her head held high and her shoulders back. Daniel and the others followed. The chamber was massive and designed to make anyone standing in the center feel insignificant. 15 platforms rose up around them in a circle, and on each platform sat a representative of a different alien species. They looked down at the humans with expressions ranging from boredom to contempt. Daniel felt his heart pounding but kept his face calm. He had been in combat before and knew how to control his fear. This was just another kind of battle, and he had trained his whole life for moments like this. Beside him, Karen stood ready, and Paul and Marie watched the exits like good soldiers should. High Arbiter Zelthon spoke first. His voice echoed through the chamber like crystal bells ringing. "Humanity stands accused of violating the territorial rights of the Kresh Hive Collective. You have established mining operations in a sector that belongs to them. You have ignored their warnings and continued your illegal activities. What do you have to say for yourselves?" Helen stepped forward, and Daniel admired her courage. "The sector in question was unclaimed when we arrived. We have documentation and survey records that prove our claim is legitimate. The Kresh filed their territorial rights after we were already there." Zelthon's crystalline body flashed with colors that Daniel did not understand, but he got the feeling it was not friendly. "Your documentation is irrelevant, human. The Council has reviewed the evidence and we find that the Kresh claim predates yours. You will withdraw immediately." Daniel watched as the trap closed around them. The evidence had been faked or the timeline had been altered, but either way, the Council had already decided. This whole trial was just theater to justify what they had already chosen to do. They were going to take away humanity's mining rights and push them out of the sector. It was the first step in containing humanity and keeping them weak. Around the chamber, the other council members watched with varying degrees of interest. Some looked satisfied like this was going exactly as planned. Others looked bored like this was beneath their notice. None of them looked like they cared about justice or fairness. They cared about power, and humanity had none. Helen tried again, but Daniel could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. She knew they were losing, and there was nothing she could do about it. "We request an independent review of the timeline. We request that neutral parties examine the evidence. We request basic fairness denied." Zelthon's voice was final. "The Council finds humanity guilty. You will withdraw from all contested sectors immediately. Furthermore, you are barred from claiming any new territory without Council approval for the next 50 years. 50 years. That was a death sentence for human expansion. In 50 years, the good sectors would all be claimed and humanity would be left with scraps. They would never be able to grow strong enough to challenge the established powers. They would be servants forever." Then one of the Kresh spoke. Counselor Vrax leaned forward and his insect mandibles clicked together in what might have been laughter. "Perhaps now you understand your place in the galaxy, humans. You are children playing with technologies you barely understand." High above the council station, the Defiant sat in what the aliens thought was a safe orbit. The station's defense systems monitored the old human ship with automated scanners that checked for threats every few seconds. Security teams had boarded when they first arrived and searched the vessel from top to bottom. They had found exactly what they expected to find. The fusion reactors were old and inefficient. The propulsion system used chemical fuel that most species had abandoned centuries ago. The weapons were kinetic cannons that fired solid projectiles using explosive charges. Everything about the ship screamed primitive and harmless. The security team had laughed among themselves as they completed their inspection. These humans were no threat to anyone. What they had not found was the device in Cargo Bay 3. They had scanned it, of course, but their instruments told them it was nothing special, just a large cylinder covered in cooling fins and wrapped in magnetic coils. The materials registered as tungsten and uranium and conventional explosives. Nothing that would alarm a security team used to dealing with weapons that bent space and manipulated dark matter. The aliens never asked what the device was for. They never wondered why a cargo ship would carry such a large and heavy cylinder. They saw what they expected to see and moved on. It was the biggest mistake they would ever make. Chief Lisa Graham had spent 6 months integrating the device into the ship's power systems. It had been delicate work and dangerous. One wrong connection and the whole thing could have exploded, taking the ship and everyone on it into oblivion. But Lisa was good at her job, and she had help from engineers who understood what was at stake. The device sat quiet and dormant, drawing no power and giving off no unusual signatures. It waited like a sleeping dragon for the moment it would be awakened. That moment had just arrived. On the bridge of the defiant Lieutenant Greg Monroe sat at his station and watched the tactical display. When Captain Daniel Carter's order came through, he took a deep breath and began the firing sequence. His hands moved over the controls with practiced precision. Target locked, sir. Station Defensive Satellite 41. Distance 300 kilometers. Lieutenant Chris Wagner ran through his weapons checklist. He had done this 100 times in simulation, but never for real. Never with the eyes of the galaxy watching and the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. Magnetic rails charged. Projectile loaded. All safeties disengaged. His voice was steady, but his heart raced. Greg looked at Chris, and Chris looked back. They both knew what was about to happen. They both knew there was no going back from this. In a few seconds, humanity would announce itself to the galaxy in a way that could never be ignored or dismissed. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely necessary. Firing. Greg pressed the button, and the Defiance railgun spoke. For the first time in anger, the weapon was not elegant, like the plasma lances that other species used. It did not bend reality like quantum disruptors or phase through shields like exotic particle beams. It was brutally simple. Take a solid projectile and accelerate it to a significant fraction of light speed using magnetic force. Then let physics do the rest. The tungsten rod weighed 2 tons. It was smooth and dense and had been machined to tolerances that Lisa's team had spent weeks perfecting. When the magnetic rails engaged, they created a force that would have crushed a human body instantly. The rod shot down the length of the barrel in milliseconds, accelerating faster and faster until it reached 40% of light speed. At that velocity, the rod was not just a weapon. It was a force of nature. The kinetic energy it carried was equivalent to a strategic nuclear warhead. The air molecules in its path were torn apart. Space itself seemed to ripple around it. The defensive satellite never had a chance. Its shields were designed to deflect energy weapons and slow down incoming missiles. They were sophisticated and powerful, and completely useless against a solid object moving at relativistic speeds. The rod hit the satellite dead center, and the impact released more energy than most species had ever seen from a single weapon. The satellite ceased to exist. One moment it was there spinning in orbit and monitoring the sector. The next moment it was a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated plasma and debris. The explosion was bright enough to be seen from the council station, and the shockwave rattled every ship within 1,000 kilometers. Alarms screamed across the alien fleet. Warning lights flashed on 100 different bridges. Commanders who had been relaxed and confident suddenly found themselves staring at tactical displays that showed a threat level they had not anticipated. The old human ship had just erased one of their defensive satellites from existence with a single shot. On the council station, emergency bulkheads slammed shut as debris peppered the outer shields. The station shuddered and groaned. Power flickered in some sections. The automated defense grid went to full alert status and began targeting the Defiant with weapons that could vaporize a moon. In the council chamber, every holographic display turned red. The peaceful scene of a trial was replaced by chaos. Warning sirens howled. Security personnel rushed in with weapons drawn. The alien counselors erupted in shouts and demands in a dozen different languages. High Arbiter Zelthon's crystalline body pulsed with colors that indicated shock and rage. "What have you done?" His voice was no longer calm and authoritative. It was the voice of someone who had just realized they had badly miscalculated. Counselor Vrax's mandibles froze in mid-gesture. His insect eyes focused on Ambassador Helen Price with an intensity that would have frightened most humans. Helen stood her ground and waited for the chaos to die down enough for her to speak. Daniel Carter's voice came through her communicator, clear and professional. "One shot, Ambassador. The satellite is gone. No shields and no armor could stop it. It was simply erased from existence. I have 31 more projectiles loaded and ready to fire. I have 300 more in storage." Helen raised her voice to be heard over the alarms and shouting. "That was a demonstration. A single shot from what you call a rust bucket. Our targeting systems have locked onto every defensive platform around this station. Every capital ship in this sector, and the council station itself." The chamber fell silent. Even the alarms seemed to quiet as the implications sank in. The humans had just proven they could destroy military targets at will, and the council's vaunted defenses had been useless to stop them. Zelthon found his voice again, but it was different. "Now, uncertain, you dare threaten the council, you will be destroyed. Our fleets will arrive and you will be hunted down like the criminals you are." First Officer Karen Phillips' voice joined the transmission from the Defiant. "Your fleets will arrive in approximately 14 minutes. We have calculated their response time based on standard council protocols. In those 14 minutes, we can fire again every 30 seconds. That gives us 28 shots. Do the math, Arbiter." The silence that followed was deafening. Every counselor was doing exactly what Karen suggested. 28 shots meant 28 destroyed ships or platforms or sections of the station itself. The humans could not win the fight, but they could inflict catastrophic damage before they were stopped. Counselor Vesh of the Thalmir spoke next. Her aquatic form rippled with distress, visible even through her environmental suit. "What are these weapons? Our scans detected nothing of such capability." "How is this possible?" Daniel's voice answered. "We call them railguns. The principle is simple. Use magnetic force to accelerate a projectile to extremely high speeds. We have been using this technology for centuries in various forms. It is not new. It is not sophisticated. It is just effective." He paused to let that sink in. The galaxy moved on to more elegant solutions. Energy weapons and exotic particles and dimensional manipulation. You developed technologies that could do incredible things, but in doing so you forgot something important. A big rock thrown fast enough will kill anything. It does not matter how advanced your shields are if the thing hitting them has enough kinetic energy. Karen added her own observation. Your defensive systems are optimized for the threats you expect. Plasma beams and quantum warheads and phase torpedoes. You built shields that can deflect or absorb those kinds of attacks. But a solid object at 40% light speed. That is an ancient problem that you stopped preparing for. Vrax's voice was quieter now, less arrogant. We have spatial distortion fields that can redirect kinetic impacts. They have been standard on military vessels for over 1,000 years. True. Daniel's tone was conversational, almost friendly, but those fields require time to activate. Time to calculate the trajectory and generate the distortion. At these ranges we can fire and hit before your systems even recognize the threat. And once the projectile is in flight, there is no stopping it. No countermeasures. No evasion. It just keeps coming until it hits. Helen stepped forward in the council chamber. Her diplomatic training took over and she projected calm authority. Humanity did not want this confrontation. We came here in good faith seeking justice. We brought evidence and legal precedents. We were prepared to negotiate and compromise. But you made it clear that justice was not on the table. You had already decided to rule against us regardless of the facts. She looked up at each counselor in turn. You laughed at us. You mocked our ships and our technology. The alien fleet arrived exactly 14 minutes after the shot, just as Karen had predicted. 30 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel in a coordinated pattern that demonstrated centuries of tactical doctrine. They were ships from a dozen different species working together with the kind of precision that only came from long practice and shared purpose. Admiral Kren commanded the response, fleet from his flagship, the Eternal Radiance. He was Veloth like High Arbiter Zelthon, and his crystalline body glowed with barely contained fury as he studied the tactical display before him. One antiquated human vessel sat in the center of his formation, surrounded but unmoving. It looked like a piece of junk that should have been scrapped generations ago, yet it had just destroyed a council defensive satellite with contemptuous ease. Kren opened a channel to the Defiant, broadcasting on all frequencies so that everyone could hear. Human vessel, this is Admiral Kren of the Galactic Council Defense Force. You have committed an act of war against the Council. Power down your weapons immediately and prepare to be boarded. If you refuse, you will be destroyed. These are your only options. On the Defiance bridge, the crew worked with the calm efficiency of people who had trained for this moment. Lisa had already rerouted every spare joule of power to the railgun systems. The ship's life support was running on minimum settings. The temperature had dropped noticeably. The artificial gravity remained offline and the crew floated at their stations held in place by safety harnesses. But the weapons were ready. The rails were charged. The projectiles were loaded. The Defiant might look like a dying ship, but it could still bite, and its bite was deadly. Daniel Carter remained in his command chair, still wearing his dress uniform from the trial. He looked at the tactical display showing the alien fleet arranged in a classic engagement pattern. They had positioned themselves to bring maximum firepower to bear, while minimizing their exposure. It was textbook perfect and completely irrelevant. Admiral Kren, this is Captain Daniel Carter. We have no intention of firing again unless you give us cause. But understand this clearly. If you attack, my ship will be destroyed. There is no question about that. Your fleet will turn us to atoms within seconds. His voice was steady and matter-of-fact. He paused and let the silence stretch out. But not before we fire every weapon we have. At this range, with weapons you cannot effectively defend against, we will destroy at least half your fleet. Maybe more. The Council Station will take critical damage. Thousands will die on all sides. So I ask you, Admiral, is this really what you want? Is a territorial dispute worth that price? Kren's response came back quickly, and Daniel could hear the anger in it. You cannot possibly believe you will survive this encounter, Captain. You are one ship against 30. Your destruction is guaranteed. Karen Phillips stepped forward and activated her tactical overlay. The display showed targeting solutions for 17 enemy ships, including the Eternal Radiance. We do not need to survive, Admiral. We just need to make you pay a price you are not willing to accept. Look at your tactical board. Look at the firing solutions we have locked in. Now tell me, how many of those ships are you willing to lose? How many crews are you willing to sacrifice? For what? To punish humans for daring to stand up for themselves? On the Council Station, the 15-member species convened an emergency session. The observation windows that had earlier shown laughing diplomats now showed species in various states of agitation and fear. This had gone far beyond a simple territorial dispute. This was a challenge to the fundamental order of galactic civilization. Councillor Vesh of the Thalmir spoke first. Her aquatic form rippled with visible distress. This is unprecedented. Never in the history of the Council has a client species threatened us directly. We do not even have protocols for this situation. Zelthon's crystalline body refracted light in complex patterns. They were clever. They brought a weapon so primitive that we did not recognize it as a threat. Our technology is optimized for defending against modern weapon systems. Kinetic impacts at relativistic speeds are an ancient problem that we solved millennia ago with spatial distortion fields. Councillor Drax of the Methonian Empire rumbled his agreement. Fields which require activation time that these humans will not grant us at close range. Our analysts have confirmed their claims. They can indeed fire every 30 seconds. They can indeed destroy multiple targets before we neutralize their ship. The casualties would be significant. Vrax clicked his mandibles in frustration. So we are to be held hostage by primitives with obsolete weapons. We are to let them dictate terms to the Council. This is unacceptable, Vesh countered immediately. The weapons may be obsolete, but they are effective. That is what matters. Our shield technologies are sophisticated, but they cannot protect us from this specific threat at these specific ranges. The humans have found a vulnerability in our defenses, and they are exploiting it. That is not primitive. That is tactical intelligence in the human. Delegation Quarters Helen Price received constant updates from Commander Stephen Blake. The intelligence feeds showed that the Council's internal debate was becoming heated. Some members were pushing hard for an immediate military response regardless of casualties. They wanted to make an example of humanity to ensure that no other client species ever dared to challenge Council authority. Other members were more cautious. They were looking at casualty projections and cost-benefit analyses. They were asking questions about whether the potential losses were worth the political statement. They were looking for alternatives. Blake highlighted key intercepts for Helen. The Veloth and Thalmir seem to be leaning toward negotiation. The Crescent Methonians want blood. It is close. If we can sway 1 or 2 more votes, we might have a chance. Helen nodded and thought quickly. We need to give them a face-saving way out, something that lets them claim they have maintained council authority while giving us what we need. Can you get a message to the Veloth counselor through back channels? Blake smiled. Already working on it, Ambassador. I have a contact in their delegation who owes us a favor. Paul Jenkins checked his weapon for the 3rd time. It was a nervous habit and he knew it, but he could not help himself. If the aliens decided to breach their quarters, he wanted to be ready. Marie Santos had already identified 3 choke points in the corridor outside where they could set up a defense. It would not hold long, but it might buy time. You ready for this, Marie? Paul kept his voice low. Marie shrugged. As ready as I will ever be. Beats sitting behind a desk pushing reports. At least this way we get to make a difference. Paul grinned despite the tension. That is one way to look at it. On the Defiant, Greg Monroe was tracking alien fleet movements with growing concern. Captain 3 cruisers are adjusting their positions. They are trying to flank us, setting up overlapping fields of fire. The noose was tightening. Daniel studied the tactical plot. Let them maneuver, Lieutenant. We are not going anywhere. We made our statement. Now we see if they are smart enough to accept it. How long until we can fire again? Chris Wagner checked his console. 22 seconds for full charge, Captain. But once we fire, they will be on us instantly. We might get off 2 shots if we are lucky. Maybe 3. Daniel nodded. Then we make those shots count. But I do not think it will come to that. Karen looked at him with a raised eyebrow. You sound confident, sir. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. Admiral Kren is a military officer. He understands casualties and acceptable losses. Right now he is looking at his tactical display and doing math. How many ships can he afford to lose? What will the political fallout be if he suffers heavy casualties over a minor territorial dispute? He is a smart officer, and smart officers do not waste lives unnecessarily. Lisa's voice came over the internal comms. Captain, if we fire again, we are going to have problems. The reactors are running hotter than I like. I can give you maybe 4 more shots before we risk a containment breach. After that, we are looking at evacuating engineering or risking a meltdown. Daniel kept his voice calm. Understood, Chief. Do what you can to keep us operational. But Lisa, I do not think we will need 4 more shots. I think this is almost over. On the Eternal Radiance, Admiral Kren was having the exact conversation Daniel had predicted. His tactical officers surrounded him with casualty projections and engagement scenarios. Every simulation ended the same way. The human ship was destroyed, but not before inflicting devastating losses on the fleet. Kren studied the numbers and felt old. He had commanded fleets for 50 years. He had fought in 3 major wars and countless minor skirmishes. He knew what combat looked like, and he knew what acceptable casualties meant. This situation was neither combat nor acceptable. His second-in-command spoke quietly. Admiral, if we spread the fleet and attack from multiple vectors simultaneously, we can reduce casualties to maybe 3 ships destroyed and 5 damaged. That is the best-case scenario. Worst case is 7 destroyed and 12 damaged. 7 ships. Kren thought about that. 7 crews. Thousands of lives for what? To punish humans for defending their mining operations. To maintain council prestige. It was a high price for prestige. He opened a private channel to the council station and specifically to High Arbiter Zelthon. Arbiter, this is Admiral Kren. I need to speak with you about the tactical situation. Admiral Kren listened as Daniel Carter laid out his proposal, and despite himself, the Veloth officer found it elegant. The human captain was offering the council a way to transform a humiliating standoff into a strategic opportunity. It was clever, and it showed a sophistication that Kren had not expected from a species so new to galactic politics. Your proposal has merit, Captain. I will forward it to the council with my recommendation, but understand that I cannot guarantee their acceptance. Some members are quite angry, and anger makes people do foolish things. Daniel nodded, even though Kren could not see him. I understand, Admiral. All I ask is that they consider it. The alternative is that we all sit here pointing weapons at each other until something goes wrong and people start dying. That serves no one. The channel closed and Daniel sat back in his chair. Karen looked at him with a question in her eyes. You think they will go for it, sir? Daniel shrugged. 50-50 chance. Maybe better. We gave them something more valuable than pride. We gave them a reason to think about the future instead of the present. On the council station, Zelthon called an emergency session. All 15 counselors gathered in a secure conference room away from the main chamber. The humans and other observers were excluded. This was a conversation that the council needed to have in private. Zelthon displayed Admiral Kren's message along with Captain Carter's proposal. The counselors read it in silence, and then the room erupted in debate. Voices overlapped in a dozen languages. Some were shouting. Others were speaking in urgent whispers. The chamber's translation systems worked overtime to keep up. Vesh spoke loudly enough to cut through the noise. "This proposal is actually quite brilliant. The human captain is offering us everything we want and making us look wise instead of weak for accepting it." Vrax clicked his mandibles in disgust. "It is a trick. They threaten us, then offer us a solution to the problem they created. We would be rewarding their aggression." "No." Counselor Drax's deep voice rumbled through the chamber. "We would be turning their aggression into an asset. Think about it. The Kresh have been expanding aggressively in 6 different sectors. They have been testing the boundaries of what the Council will tolerate. We have all seen the reports." He gestured at Vrax, who shifted uncomfortably. "No offense intended to our Kresh colleague, but we all know your Hive Collective has been pushing hard against the territorial agreements. You have been counting on the fact that enforcing those agreements would be costly and politically complicated." Vrax did not deny it. The Kresh expansion was an open secret among the Council members. They had been gradually encroaching on unclaimed territories, and even some claimed ones, betting that the Council would not risk a major conflict to stop them. Drax continued. "Now imagine we have access to these human kinetic weapons. Weapons that our conventional defenses are not optimized to counter. Weapons that the Kresh specifically do not have. Suddenly, the cost calculation for Kresh expansion changes dramatically. Suddenly, they have to worry about running into human ships that can hurt them badly." Vesh picked up the thread. "And it is not just the Kresh. There are half a dozen aggressive minor powers that have been causing problems on the fringes. The Talcorians, the Hive Rats of Sector 9, the Crystalline Swarm. All of them have been testing our resolve. All of them would think twice if they knew we had access to weapons they cannot easily defend against." A smaller counselor from a species called the Nimari spoke up. "But this sets a dangerous precedent. If we negotiate with the humans after they threatened us, every client species will think they can do the same." Zelthon had been thinking about this problem. "Not if we frame it correctly. We do not negotiate because they threatened us. We negotiate because we have recognized their value as strategic partners. We acknowledge that they have developed a unique military capability that complements our existing forces. We make it about opportunity, not capitulation," another counselor objected. "The other client species will see through that immediately, probably." Zelthon agreed. "But what they will also see is that the Council rewards innovation and strength. Species that develop useful capabilities and demonstrate military effectiveness get treated as equals. Species that do nothing remain clients. That is not a bad message to send." The debate continued for another hour. Arguments were made and countered. Political calculations were discussed. Economic impacts were analyzed. Slowly, a consensus began to form. It was not unanimous. Vrax and 2 other counselors remained opposed, but the majority saw the wisdom in what the humans were offering. Finally, Zelthon called for a vote. Those in favor of accepting the human proposal and opening negotiations. 12 hands or appendages or energy signatures rose. Those opposed. 3 remained sitting. The decision was made. Zelthon sent a message to Admiral Kren. "Stand down, Admiral. Maintain defensive positions but do not engage. The Council has decided to negotiate with the humans." Kren felt a wave of relief and broadcast the stand-down order to his fleet. On the defiant alarms suddenly went silent. The tactical display showed alien weapons powering down. Ships that had been moving into attack positions halted and held their positions. Greg Monroe let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Captain, I think they are backing off." Daniel allowed himself a small smile. "So it seems, Lieutenant. Stand down from combat alert, but keep the weapons ready, just in case someone changes their mind." He opened a channel to the delegation quarters. "Ambassador Price, the Council has agreed to negotiate. You're about to get a formal invitation to return to the chamber." Helen closed her eyes and said a brief prayer of thanks. Then she opened them and became all business. "Understood, Captain. We will be ready. Commander Blake, start preparing briefing documents." I want proposals for territorial rights trade agreements and military cooperation, ready to present within the hour. Blake and his staff moved quickly. They had been preparing for this possibility even when it seemed unlikely. Now all that preparation was about to pay off. Within 30 minutes, they had a comprehensive package ready for negotiation. The second session of the council was very different from the first. The humans walked into the chamber and found the atmosphere completely changed. The counselors were no longer dismissive or mocking. They sat forward with attention and interest. The holographic displays no longer showed accusations, but rather territorial maps and economic projections. Zelthon spoke first, and his tone was respectful. Ambassador Price, Captain Carter, the Council has reviewed the situation, and we believe there may have been misunderstandings on both sides. We are prepared to discuss a new framework for human participation in galactic affairs. Helen stepped forward. The Council is wise. Humanity seeks only what any species seeks: the right to grow and prosper, the right to claim our place among the stars. We do not wish to be enemies of the Council. We wish to be partners. Zelthon's crystalline body glowed softly. What specifically does humanity propose? Helen launched into her prepared remarks. Humanity requests formal recognition as a sovereign power with voting privileges in the Council. We understand that full voting rights traditionally require a probationary period. We are willing to accept observer status initially with a clear path to full membership, she continued. We request control of our current settlements in contested sectors and the right to expand into unclaimed territories without requiring prior approval from the Council. We will, of course, register our claims and respect existing territorial boundaries. We request trade agreements that give us access to galactic markets on equal terms with established species. And what does the Council gain from this arrangement? Vesh asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Helen glanced at Daniel, who gave a slight nod. We offer military cooperation. Specifically, we will share our kinetic weapons technology with Council defense forces. We will provide technical specifications, manufacturing processes, and tactical doctrine. Additionally, we offer to deploy human ships to support Council operations in contested areas. She paused for effect. We have noticed that certain species have been expanding aggressively in ways that concern multiple Council members. Human ships with kinetic weapons could provide a cost-effective deterrent to such expansion. We would be willing to patrol sectors where the Council needs a presence, but cannot afford to commit major fleet assets. Vrax spoke up, his mandibles clicking with barely suppressed anger. So you threaten us, then offer to be our enforcers. How convenient, Daniel responded directly. Counselor Vrax, with respect, we did not threaten you until you tried to strip away our legitimate territorial claims. We came here seeking justice. When justice was denied, we showed that we had the power to defend ourselves. Now we are offering to use that power in service of Council interests. That is not a threat. That is a partnership, he continued. You are correct that the Kresh expansion has concerned other Council members. Your Hive Collective has been testing boundaries and counting on the fact that stopping you would be expensive. Well, humanity can help make it less expensive. Our weapons are cheap to manufacture and effective against conventional defenses. We can provide the Council with leverage where leverage is currently lacking. Vrax settled back in his platform and said nothing. He knew when he was beaten. The other counselors were already nodding. Morning came to the Council station, though morning and night were artificial constructs on a structure floating in space. The lights brightened gradually, simulating a sunrise that existed only in programming. Ambassador Helen Price woke early and reviewed the negotiation documents one last time. Today would determine whether humanity truly had a future among the stars, or whether yesterday's victory would prove temporary. Commander Stephen, Blake knocked on her door carrying fresh intelligence reports. Ambassador, you need to see this. 3 more Council members have privately expressed support for the treaty. The Thalmir delegation sent a message saying they are impressed with our professionalism. Even the Kresh seem to be accepting the inevitable. Helen felt cautiously optimistic. That is good news, Stephen. But let us not celebrate until the signatures are on the documents. A lot can still go wrong. Blake nodded, but he was smiling. She could tell he believed they had already won. Maybe he was right. The final negotiation session began at what the station considered mid-morning. The Council chamber was filled again, but the atmosphere was businesslike rather than hostile. The holographic displays showed draft agreements and proposed amendments. Translators worked quietly, ensuring that every word was understood in every language. Zelthon called the session to order. We have reviewed the human proposals and prepared our responses. Let us begin with territorial rights. The Council acknowledges human claims in 17 sectors currently under dispute. These sectors will be recognized as human sovereign territory effective immediately. Helen felt a surge of triumph but kept her expression neutral. That represents significant progress, Arbiter. We appreciate the Council's recognition of our legitimate claims, Zelthon continued. In exchange, humanity agrees to register all future territorial claims with the Council Registry and to respect existing boundaries claimed by other species. Disputed claims will be resolved through established arbitration procedures. Is this acceptable? It is, Helen confirmed. We have always been willing to work within established frameworks. We simply ask that those frameworks be applied fairly. The next item was trade agreements. Councillor Vesh took the lead on this discussion. The Thalmir were merchants and understood economics better than most species. We propose that humanity be granted Class II trading status. This allows access to most galactic markets with standard tariffs and regulations. After a probationary period of 5 years, your status can be upgraded to Class I if you demonstrate responsible trade practices. Helen had hoped for Class I immediately, but Class II was acceptable. We agree to these terms. However, we request that certain human technologies be exempt from standard export restrictions, specifically our kinetic weapon systems and related technologies. Vesh's aquatic form rippled. That is acceptable, provided that you only share those technologies with Council-approved entities. We do not want your weapons proliferating to hostile powers. Understood and agreed. Helen made a note on her datapad. We will maintain strict export controls and work with Council security to prevent unauthorized distribution. The military cooperation agreement took longer to finalize. Admiral Kren participated via communication link from his flagship. He had concerns about command structure and rules of engagement. If human ships are going to operate under Council authority, we need clear protocols. Who gives orders in joint operations? What happens if human commanders disagree with Council strategy? Daniel Carter spoke up from his position beside Helen. Admiral, we propose a hybrid model. In joint operations, a Council commander has overall strategic authority. However, human ships retain tactical autonomy. We follow the mission objectives, but we choose how to accomplish them. This is similar to how your own multi-species fleets operate. Kren considered this. And if your tactical decisions conflict with strategic goals, then we have failed at the planning stage. Daniel's tone was respectful but firm. The key is communication and mutual respect. We brief our capabilities honestly. You plan operations that use those capabilities effectively. We execute our part of the plan. If problems arise, we adapt together. Kren was silent for a moment. Then his crystalline voice came back with a note of approval. That is a sound approach, Captain. I can work with that. The Council agrees to your terms. The discussion moved to technology transfer. Helen had brought technical specifications for the railgun systems and manufacturing processes. Lisa Graham had prepared detailed documentation with help from Earth's best engineers. The information was comprehensive but not complete. They were sharing enough to make the weapons useful, but not enough to make humanity obsolete. Counselor Drax reviewed the documents. This is adequate for us to begin production. However, we will need human technical advisors to ensure proper implementation. Are you prepared to provide such advisors? We are, Helen confirmed. We can send a team of 50 engineers and technicians within 3 months. They will assist with manufacturing setup and training. We also propose joint research projects to improve the technology further. Excellent. Drax seemed genuinely pleased. The Methonian Empire has extensive manufacturing capabilities. We can produce these weapons in quantity once we understand the processes. Drax spoke up again, and his tone was less hostile than before, though still wary. What prevents humanity from developing more advanced versions of these weapons and keeping them secret? How do we know you are sharing your best technology? Daniel answered honestly. You do not know, Counselor. You have to trust us just as we have to trust you. That is what partnership means. However, I will point out that it is in our interest to share effectively. If Council forces are well armed with our weapons, then potential enemies have to worry about facing those weapons. That makes everyone safer, including humanity. He paused. Besides, we are not stupid. We know you will reverse engineer our technology and eventually improve on it. That is fine. We expect that. What we are offering is a head start and our expertise. In exchange, we get recognition and rights. That is a fair trade. Vrax settled back and clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. The human captain had a point. The council would indeed analyze and improve the technology, but having human cooperation would accelerate that process significantly. The final major topic was council membership. This was the most sensitive issue because it touched on political power directly. Zelthon addressed it carefully. The council is prepared to grant humanity observer status immediately. You will attend sessions and participate in discussions, but not vote on binding resolutions. After 5 years, assuming you have fulfilled your treaty obligations and demonstrated responsible behavior, you will be eligible for full membership with voting rights. Helen had expected this. Observer status was standard for newly recognized species. 5 years is acceptable. However, we request that the criteria for full membership be clearly defined. We do not want subjective judgments or moving goalposts. Fair point. Zelton projected a document onto the holographic displays. Here are the specific criteria. Maintain treaty obligations. No unauthorized military actions. Participate constructively in council operations. Resolve disputes through established channels. Demonstrate stable governance. Are these criteria acceptable? They are. Helen felt relief wash over her. This was really happening. They were really going to pull this off. The rest of the session dealt with minor details and implementation timelines. When would human ships begin joint patrols? How often would council observers visit human facilities? What communication protocols would be used? It was boring but necessary work. Finally, after 8 hours of discussion, Zelton called for the final vote. All those in favor of accepting the treaty with humanity as drafted. 14 hands or appendages or energy signatures rose. Only Vrax abstained. The treaty was approved. Zelton's voice carried a note of formality. By the authority vested in this council, let it be recorded that humanity is recognized as a sovereign power and granted observer status in the Galactic Council. Welcome, Ambassador Price. Welcome to the community of civilized species. Helen stood and bowed to each counselor in turn. On behalf of humanity, I accept this recognition with gratitude and humility. We pledge to honor our commitments and to work in partnership with all council members for the peace and prosperity of the galaxy. The ceremony that followed was brief, but meaningful. Each counselor came forward to greet the human delegation. Even Vrax approached, though his manner was stiff. Ambassador, Captain, I do not fully trust your species yet, but I acknowledge your courage and your capability. Perhaps in time we will find common ground. Daniel extended his hand. Counselor, I hope we do. The galaxy is large enough for all of us to prosper. Vrax looked at the extended hand, then reached out with his manipulator appendage. The gesture was awkward but genuine. 3 months later, the Defiant returned to Earth orbit. The ship had been in space for 7 months, and the crew was exhausted but triumphant. As they approached home, they could see the orbital construction yards working overtime. New ships were being built, incorporating lessons learned from the Defiant's encounter. Humanity was preparing to claim its place among the stars. The crew was brought down to Earth for a hero's welcome. Cities across every continent held celebrations. Daniel Carter found himself promoted to admiral and given command of the new Second Fleet.